Hey, I'm Summer.
And I'm Mike.
And we got married.
With children.
We're married 2 years now.
Blended for 11.
Like a margarita.
Yeah, baby, like a margarita.
And you're listening to the Everything Always podcast.
Want to tell them why we do this?
We do this because blending families isn't easy. There's step-parenting, co-parenting, his ex,
Her ex.
schedules, sibling rivalry,
Money issues.
custody issues.
Dating and relationship issues.
It's a whole lot of stuff.
Blended with a whole lot of good stuff.
And we're here to talk about all of it because we've done most of it.
We might not be experts, but we've learned a lot.
And we're still learning, and we want to share that with you.
Thanks for joining. Now let's go.
Hey guys, welcome to another Everything Always podcast. It is me, Summer Mulder, your host today. And I'm wrapping it out with Renée Bauer, who is a speaker, divorce attorney. She's an author of multiple books, and she's the CEO of Happy Even After. And that's also a podcast, Happy Even After. I love it. It's so cool. We're talking about so many good things today, like co-parenting, guilt with divorce, time you spend with your kids, conflict with your ex, and, kind of like those same challenges that you deal with in a blended family, life after divorce, and a lot of other golden nuggets, like with mindset, things that you should know before blending your family, moving in together, what the kids are feeling, what you're feeling, all of that good stuff. Like there's a lot of things, and there's a little bit of a twist to those things that we haven't talked about before. So I'm excited for you. Let me tell you a little bit about Renée before we dive into the interview. She's actually an award-winning divorce attorney. Like I said before, she is a published author, and she has her own law firm, which is Bauer Law Group. She has almost 2 decades of experience representing countless high net worth clients. She is committed to empowering all women to redefine their sense of peace and purpose in their new life. And she herself is divorced and has a blended family with older children, but she did this when her children were younger. So you're going to hear all about that. She's also a certified mediator, receiving her training from mediation pioneer Forrest Woody Mostyn of Beverly Hills. She has incredible insights, which are totally sought after by local and regional media outlets, podcasts, conferences. She speaks on co-parenting, blended family dynamics, relationships, and the art of reinvention. And she knows this because she's walked this path herself, and she knows exactly what it feels like to face uncertainty, shame, and the fear of losing that life that you once had, and what that means in terms of moving forward. And how do you even move forward, especially if you are heartbroken, if you are really experiencing that hard loss. So she's just awesome. I mean, she's an accomplished litigator. She educates and inspires countless women to really reclaim their right to happiness. And she helps people do this multiple ways, but one really cool way is through her course, which is the D course. You'll hear all about that. It's super awesome. So as always, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes, but listen out for some really epic golden nuggets with Renée. Enjoy. Renée, welcome to the show. I am so thrilled to have you here. We're going to talk about so many good things. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love what you're doing and all of the information that you're putting out here. It's good stuff.
I hope so. There's so much, it's almost impossible to tackle everything, because when it comes to divorce, second marriage, blending families, I mean, it's like this infinite amount of things that can go wrong, can also go right, but there's just so much, and it can be so overwhelming, which is why I'm so grateful that you're here today. Before we dive in though, can you tell us a little bit of your background, what your situation is, and your career, what led you to do the work that you do today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a divorce attorney in Connecticut, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And I'm also an author. I've written a children's book on divorce, and I wrote a book for Connecticut residents about divorce. I have my own podcast called Happy Even After. And I am a divorce educator. So I have an online divorce course to really help someone who's at the beginning stages or in their divorce, to help them really grapple with mindset and expectations and a lot of other things that usually divorce lawyers don't focus on when you retain them. And it's so important to think about those things and have a plan, because it's the only way you're going to come out the other end. So I do all of that, but personally, I am also divorced and I have a big old blended family right now. So I've kind of walked the walk and talked the talk and have experienced, most of what my own clients go through, so I can really empathize and know sometimes how difficult it is and the challenges that come up. And like you said, it's sometimes it's week to week and you can't really expect some of them, and you never know what will happen.
Totally. Oh, I so agree. So what's your family? How many kids? What are the ages?
Yeah, so we have 4 altogether. My son is 14, and then the next is my husband's son, who's 16. Then we have an 18-year-old who's heading off to college this week, then a 20-year-old who is in college. So we have a lot of older kids now, but when we started this, we'll be married 5 years coming up in the fall, and we dated for a couple of years before that. So our kids were really younger when they were meeting and really integrating our families. And so we have gone through that with almost every age, except for we didn't have toddlers at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're similar to our dynamic. Right. Yeah. It's a journey.
It sure is. I mean, teenagers are a journey in and of itself.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And you think it's every age, you're like, wow, this is really hard. It's going to get easier. Right. But then there's just different challenges with the different ages.
Right.
I have a billion questions, but I don't want to be all over the place because there's just so many things. There's questions that I have. There's questions I know that we get from our listeners that are kind of like a common theme. One thing I want to tackle right off the bat, because it's huge all the time, is I want to dive in a little bit into co-parenting and your experience and what are the absolute golden tips that you have to making that work. Because if anything, that is, probably one of the most popular questions that we get, or popular issues. And oh my gosh, I'm going insane. I can't get on the same page with my ex, or I'm having issues with my husband or my wife's ex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk about just in this topic. What I tell people is that they don't have to show up to every fight they're invited to. So often when you're coming out the other end of a divorce, there's a whole lot of feelings left over about your ex-spouse. And there could be because there was faults in the marriage, or, there's just so many, there's a reason why the marriage broke down. And often that transfers to the co-parenting relationship and what that looks like after. So when you have someone who's really always kind of stepping into the ring to throw a punch, you cannot step into the ring with them. So you can choose not to respond, or not to respond in kind. It's someone who is going to constantly pick fights and try to cause arguments, has this energy that they bring with them. And, I'm a big energy person, and you can feel someone's energy and it can shift your own for better or worse. And so often when someone's bringing that kind of toxic energy into a conversation, it's so easy for the other person to jump right into that. And now you end up, it becomes a fight of ego, and it has nothing to do with your kids. And so the counter to that would be to step back from it and recognize what's happening, recognize what your spouse is putting out there, and sort of internally recognize that if you're going to go down that road, you're not going to resolve anything. And you're only going to end up with a phone call hung up, or some inappropriate emojis being sent, through text. So, it's really about, you can control how the conversation goes. And, when you consistently don't step into that ring with that person, what you're doing is kind of reprogramming how they communicate with you. So you're creating this habit of every time your ex is going to throw something that you want to bite back, if you just change the tone and respond in a different way, and if you do that every single time, it's not going to be so much fun anymore. They're going to be just shadow boxing by themselves, and they're going to slowly start to change how they communicate with you. You're creating a new habit, and it takes a big person to do that. Sometimes you don't want to be the bigger person, and it's like, oh, I feel like they're walking all over me, and I need to fight back. But what is that really accomplishing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? These are just, I always say this. It's also such a great example to show your kids when dealing with conflict or dealing with someone that you don't necessarily get along with. And sometimes people don't realize it, but your kids feel it and they know when they see it, it seeps through, and they see, or they walk in on you getting mad, or they hear you talking about it with a friend. And it's not teaching them the mature way of going about a disagreement.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because kids, no matter the age, can pick up on the conflict between the parents. They know from when they're little to when they're a teen. They absolutely know how their parents are getting along, and you're teaching them, and you're going to be teaching them how to deal with conflict in their own lives. And what do you want them to model as they become adults? What type of behavior, and they're watching. And, it's not divorce that damages kids. And the research is so clear that it's the conflict that causes the problems. And it's the conflict that causes drug use and promiscuity and depression and all of the bad stuff that we sort of associate with divorcing kids. It has nothing to do with the divorce itself, and everything to do with the level of conflict. So if you have a low level conflict, divorce, and co-parenting relationship, your child is going to be just fine, and they're going to thrive.
That is such gold right there, because my husband and I felt this as well. There is a shame or a guilt or I messed up my kids' lives because of this divorce. And just hearing you say this, it's not really about the divorce. Sure, in the beginning, of course, there is. I wish my parents were back together, and depending on the age, my daughter, I don't think ever even knew my ex-husband and I together, and my son was too young to remember. But for a lot of kids, yes, there is that heartbreak. But what's more traumatizing is feeling like these two are at each other, or they're fighting all of the time. And so I would love to talk about that guilt that comes along with, my kids are messed up for life now because we got to.
Yeah. And that is such an important topic. And that's why this is the work that I do, why I do it, and why I'm so passionate about it, because the guilt and shame that we put on ourselves because of the divorce, and because we feel like we're screwing up our family, or we're being selfish in making decisions, is really heartbreaking. When I started talking publicly about shame, my own shame and my own divorce, when I'm a divorce attorney and I felt it, people started coming out, and I started getting messages from people saying, I was listening to this podcast, and I was sitting in my hotel room, and I was crying because that's what I felt. I felt so alone, and I couldn't talk about it because no one understood, or I was being judged. And that's so sad, because we're allowed to decide that a relationship isn't working anymore. And if it's toxic, you're making a decision for one reason. But sometimes people are making decisions just because the relationship doesn't fit. It doesn't feel right anymore, or good enough just isn't good enough anymore. And you can make a decision for that reason too, and that's okay. It's just so sad to see someone go through their life without any sort of joy. And it's just like, well, we don't do anything. We don't enjoy each other's company. We sort of just are like roommates. And, maybe when the kids are off to college, we'll do something. Why, how much wasted time is that? How much time have you lost? It's so sad.
Well, and the thing too is it's almost modeling a martyr behavior for your children. To say, I'm just gonna be unhappy. And then I've always questioned, do children grow up feeling guilt themselves. Like I knew my parents weren't happy, but they stayed together. And then as soon as I was, 18, they split. And I could always feel that they never got along. I always wonder the impact of that on children.
Yeah, and also that exactly what you said about it's such a generational decision, because my parents' generation, it's you stay together no matter what. You muscle through it, and I feel like people aren't necessarily doing that anymore. And now you do see people making different decisions and not feeling like they have to just stay together because of that. And it always is fascinating when someone says, well, I'll stay together until the kids are older. I think divorce, I would argue, that is almost more difficult when you have kids who are not 40-year-old kids, but, they're maybe over 18 in their early 20s, because now they have taken on this role of feeling like they have to take care of a parent, or a lot of times parents bring them into the conflict. And we see that all the time. And it's because, well, she or he's an adult, so we're going to tell them things. They're still your kids. And now that stressor is so impactful, and it's so waiting just for that. I don't think that's the right answer. And I think that that's going to actually have the opposite effect. And you could end up causing so much more stress to your kids had it just happened when they were younger. And then you're creating a new norm, a new redefined family, and kind of moving on.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So what about, there's couples that it's not working out, but there's the one that really wished it had and can't let go. And they can't get past their hurt. They can't get past, I actually know of a couple. They've been married, I want to say over, let's see, maybe over 15 years. And the first wife of the husband still, even though got remarried, still got past the hurt from the first marriage. And it was kind of a surprise to the new wife, but it was there. And there was this whole meeting about it, and they all had to talk about it with the new spouses there. And I'm like, wow, how does somebody like that, how do you move on from that to say, okay, time to get over it, time to move on.
Right. And, that's what I was talking about at the very beginning on the intro. That's mindset. And how you come out of your divorce has everything to do with your mindset during the divorce. And usually when someone comes to see me, I can very quickly predict which category they're going to fall into, and whether they're going to be the ones who have just survived it, or the ones who came out and are actually going to end up thriving. And it's usually because of the type of questions that they're asking. And so the person who's just going to survive it is asking, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to deal with not seeing my kids every weekend? How am I going to deal with being alone? And the other person who's going to end up thriving has a different set of questions. And their questions are, what can I do so I can make sure my bills are paid? What can I do during my time when I don't have my children? What can I do for myself? And it's all, what can I do? Which is, the first person is looking for some external answers. They're looking for someone, a lawyer. They're looking for anyone to put a Band-Aid over it and fix it for them. And that second person, the one who's asking, what can I do, is they're taking the action themselves. And that's the person who's going to come out thriving, because they're going to figure everything out and make adjustments and pivot. And maybe it requires you have to sell the house. And maybe that's an opportunity to create a new life and a new space for you. So, it's really hard when you have someone like that who's stuck, and there's not a whole lot that the other spouse can do who has moved on. If the work for that person who is really just kind of in the quicksand of their feelings from the divorce that are left over is going to have to acknowledge, they don't want to be in this place anymore. And how do you get out of it? And they're going to have to do some work with that. And a lot of times that's therapy, but they're going to have to be the one who's proactive in order to fix that.
Hey guys, guess what? We have a new website where you can see all of our podcasts and get easy access to the show notes, everything we talk about on the episodes, and you can even listen to the podcast directly from the site. You can contact us through the site and share your thoughts and questions. Check it out at www.everythingalways.co. That's www.everythingalways.co.
And you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Everything Always Co. We just set it up and we'll be sure to put important announcements there.
And we love that this podcast has been so helpful to so many, and our hope is to share it with even more. So can you help us? Will you take a moment now or after the episode to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, and share it? It would mean the world to us, and it helps us to keep bringing you the best content.
Come on, we appreciate you guys. So what do you say, baby? Back to the episode?
Back to the episode.
I love that question of like, what can I do? Because you're really thinking about, what can I do to move forward? What can I do? You're really thinking about what are the things I'm going to do to proactively have a good life? I love the name of your podcast, Happily Even After. I love
Thank
that.
you.
Because it's true. And people really think like, well, that's it. And even if I do find somebody else that, I'm not going to get to see my kids full time. I'm not going to have, they're thinking about all of the, not haves instead of what could actually be. But along with that is another thing that I have seen is people who have been stuck, and maybe it's, years after they're finally dating, or there's been, they've been super traumatized by their divorce or hurt and pain. And they finally start to come out of it and see that light, and they meet someone and they're feeling happy. And then they're struggling with the guilt of finding happiness again. And then the guilt of having attention go to another place, and the children feeling that. Can you help with that? Because that's another common thing that we see a lot.
Yeah. So, there's different ways to tackle that, depending on the age of the kids too. It's often when someone starts dating again, there's this inclination once they have, established this is someone who's going to be around my life, to bring that person into their world and to bring them in completely. And all of a sudden this person is now eating dinner every night, and they're attending all of the events together and all of that. So my best recommendation is to go slow and slowly integrate this person so that your children don't feel like there's a stranger around. They still are going to crave the time with their parent. And if they're kind of fighting for attention and feeling like that as a parent, you're not giving them that attention that you used to, because that's often what happens too, that you're kind of overcompensating after the divorce. I think it's so important to really make sure you're carving out separate time with your kids where this person isn't around. I interviewed a psychiatrist who actually gave some great advice about when you're inviting the person into the house is to letting the child kind of run the show that day, in the sense of that person says, well, where would you like me to sit? Rather than the new boyfriend or girlfriend just automatically taking a seat, and maybe it's that child's seat, or, it's, oh, do you want to play a game? And, really letting the child kind of guide. That's for younger kids. If you have a teenager who's sort of just rolling their eyes through all of it, that's of course another set of challenges. And you just have to, I think the importance is just communicating with that teenager and talking to them about what their concerns are and what their feelings are, and, what would make them feel better. And then sometimes, because teenagers can be really difficult, sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I'm allowed to be happy too. And, I'm allowed to date and do all of those things, and kind of like a tough love talk. Your kid, and what they'll best respond to.
Yes, that's so true. And I love that you're saying that, because I hear that guilt a lot, like, hey, stop talking about how happy you are with your new boyfriend, or stop talking about your new girlfriend. I don't want to hear it anymore, So in terms of actually, solidifying the deal, and you're past the dating, you're getting married, you're all going to live together, or perhaps you're just, even if you're not married, you're moving in together and really blending. What is some advice that you have? Because, with multiple kids, And even if there's just one child involved, tensions get heavy and thick because there's either moving into the house where you once lived with somebody for, even if it's a new house, there's this kind of kids going back and forth. Whose house is this? I feel like an alien in my home. I mean, there's so many different things. And I remember myself having all of those feelings, like, where are we going to live together? Or my kids feel like this isn't their home yet, or these kids feel like you've intruded. What are some, I know that's like, I just threw like a bunch, but like,
yeah, that is, it's such a great question, and one that I don't ever talk about. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think you're so right, because, with my situation, my stepkids came into my house, and I think for a while, that's exactly how they felt. It wasn't their own home. And so there was definitely some adjustment there. I think making them part of that process is really helpful. Like, okay, this is going to be your room. So let's redecorate it. How do you want it? What color do you want in the walls? Let's, make them excited for what their space is. And it feels like it's going to be their own space, and not like they're walking into a room and kind of unpacking with the furniture that's already there. Like, this is their part of that process. We use, even now, a lot of family meetings for stuff. Like, I think we had a family meeting maybe a year ago where our teenagers were just, quite frankly, slobs. And like, there were, candy wrappers everywhere. And it was just like, hey, everyone needs to do their part. And it was kind of a sit down just to say, like, hey, let's talk about what's not working, and let's try to figure this out. We do that a lot for, like, if we're planning a vacation, kind of getting everyone's input as to, okay, we're one family, so not one person gets to decide or dictate. Like, let's talk about it. And, and because our kids are older, that works because everyone has a say.
Yeah, so true. And we'll do the same thing. It's so important that they have a voice. I think that's one of the biggest things that causes the tension, is people feel like their voice is getting diluted. Somebody else is more important. And, especially as kids, as always, as adults, we want to feel that we're important, that we matter here, that we're significant. And when you come together, it's like, well, wait a minute, my dad's now paying attention to that kid, or she's so close to her. And, there's just all of that going on. And what I see with people, so for us, we've been doing this for a really long time. We blended 12 years ago, and I'll hear people with these frustrations, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know. And I've been there, but there isn't this quick fix.
No.
It's so much about time and consistency, and just constantly knowing you're always important. You always have a voice. We're always going to, and I think that's a frustration for people, because it takes a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's conversations we're having now that I never even dreamed we would get to have, 8 years ago.
Right. And it's so true, because someone wants, like, the 10 things you can do in order to blend your family seamlessly. Well, it's not going to happen. It's not, there aren't, it's going to be an ever evolving notebook of volumes of it. So yeah, there aren't, and you're right. I also think that you just kind of reminded me of something. I think it's so important for the adults to have a conversation about what happens in the home in terms of discipline, and who's doing what, and setting some ground rules, because I think nothing brings more tension into a house than a step parent starting to discipline and really become, like, forceful with demands and kind of barking orders to the other kids. I think that that's going to be a really good way to drive a wedge between that in that relationship and cause some problems. So, set some ground rules and say, okay, here's where asking someone to do something is different than, like, the actual disciplining, and reserving the disciplining for the parent, and, what's okay and what's not okay. And of course, some of this changes with age too, because I think when the kids are younger, the other person takes on a little bit more of that parenting role. But those are conversations that should happen before the move-in actually occurs, and not after an incident happens and everyone's angry and the kids are angry and the adults are angry, and, there's all kinds of feelings that are going to kind of stick around for a while. So it's best to get ahead of that.
No, I absolutely agree. And we talk about that a lot, and it's so true, especially when you're really trying to nurture that relationship with the stepchild,
Yeah.
that's definitely you're definitely going to put them off.
You know what's hard too, I think, was when you're not going into a new place together and someone's moving into somebody else's space, which happens often. I think it as an adult, if you're the person whose the house they're moving into, you need to learn to chill out a little bit too. Because you have, it's your space and things have been done a certain way and you like things to be in certain places. And if you're trying to enforce that or have the new people moving in all follow along with there's going to be some conflict there too. So, I think you have to be a little conscious about relaxing a little bit on what your expectations are of what happens on your house. I mean, especially if you're a really neat person and you have teenagers move in, good luck. You're going to really have to relax there because you're going to find the empty boxes in the snack cabinet and the cans under the bed. Like, that's just what happens.
That's been one of the biggest learning lessons for me, is to just chill, because I am that person that's neat and orderly. I like things in order. And with 4 teenagers right now, they're all teens.
Mm-hmm.
That does not.
Yeah.
We have one, makes his bed every day. You don't have to ask him. He's super on top of it. But the others are really not. It is that hey, we had this family meeting, talk about cleaning up and this and that, but we have to do it a lot because you walk in and there are the candy wrappers and the things on the floor and it's all of that. And I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. And I have my husband telling me, all right, it's okay.
I know.
We'll just talk to them about it. We'll ask them to do it. And it's why can't they just be consistent? But they're not, it's just,
I know.
And there's things, it's like you said too, not just when it comes to co-parenting, but even with your kids and especially step kids, what you don't have to make it a fight. You can choose the things that are actually going to be a really important thing and what's really going to have a consequence. Okay, if you snuck out, we're going to have a major consequence. But if you're occasionally making a mess here or there, but we ask you to clean it up and you do, okay, we're good. I've learned that a lot, that you can't, especially with blended families, you can very easily feel out of control. And so those are the type things that make you feel in control, keep things neat, keep things, orderly. For me, that's definitely a thing. It's well, if these things are clean, then I'm at least in control of that. But it doesn't, it's better to be in control of your emotions and how you handle situations.
Absolutely. And I'm with you because I'm the same way. And if I found another lifesaver wrapper in between the cushions, I was going to lose my mind, and depending on where we are in the month, sometimes it's I have to okay, and breathe through it and then kind of say, is this really that important? Is this really the worst thing that's happening right now in this house? Then that's really not so bad. So exactly. I mean, we're human, we're imperfect. It's learning not just for the kids, but for us too, as adults.
Oh, totally. Gosh, I've learned the most amazing lessons from this whole experience. Okay. I want to go. So you mentioned, first of all, you have amazing books out. You have your courses. I want to make sure that we listeners where to go. And I'm also going to have a link in our show notes so that they can access all of this amazing stuff that you have. But can you talk about your I'm such a fan of course, because I learned so well doing courses. Can you talk about the courses that you have?
Yeah. So I have a free video course that's on my website, which is www.msreneebauer.com. And so that's called First Steps to Freedom. It's a short little video course, kind of just setting you up to start thinking about what has to happen if you're in that place that you're making a decision about filing for divorce. Just kind of getting your ducks in a row. The D course is the deeper dive course that is a 5 or 6 pillar course, depending if you have kids or not. And that is all based on frameworks that I came up with to help someone get from point A to point B. And for example, alimony. Some people come to the table with this expectation that alimony is going to happen no matter what. So we walk through a framework to decide whether alimony is even appropriate in your case. And, I'm a Connecticut lawyer, so I only practice in this state, but these things really have nothing to do with the law and really everything to do with your expectation, because the reasonable expectation and that reasonableness element is all over the country. Every court has that fair test in order to enter into an agreement. So it's really helping you to understand what you need to know in order to make the best decisions, and whether that fight for something like alimony, which is usually like the sticking point in every divorce, is something that's reasonable and rational or not. And so I do that from parenting plans and talking about whether you want to keep the house or not. That's usually like a really big trigger. And there's so many people have an emotional attachment to the house. And I walk through an actual mathematical equation, a really simple one, because I'm not a math person, to figure out whether the house makes sense and whether you should even be having this conversation, because that attachment sometimes is such a financial burden, and trying to remove the emotion from it. And then talking about mindset and expectations, and even dating after divorce, and when it's appropriate to start dating as well. So it's really so that someone can actually come to their attorney and have all of the information in order to help their attorney do their job better for them. So many people come to me and I ask them, well, what are your goals? They don't know. They have absolutely no idea. And if you're telling your lawyer, here are my goals, that lawyer is going to have a much easier job accomplishing that. But if your goals are all over the place because you don't know what they are and you haven't spent the time to actually define them, your lawyer doesn't really know how to do his or her job, because they don't know. They're just kind of doing a general blanket job because this is the way, divorces work. But rather you're giving them something that's very personal to you. So it's helping them to do all of that and hopefully save a whole lot of time and money through litigation, because the last thing anyone wants to do is let a judge decide their fate in future and make decisions about their kids.
Exactly. Gosh, this is so great. This is so fabulous. And I really love that it's really incorporating, not just the business side of things or what happens in divorce after divorce, but it's also really taking into consideration the quality of your life and knowing that you have a say, and you're not just like doomed because you got a divorce. Like, this is it. Now it's all downhill. It's actually, you can have like an amazing life afterwards and so much better than before. And I love that. It's empowering. All the work that you're doing is so empowering. And
thank you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, Renée, this was so good. There's so many good things. And I know there's like so many other, I feel like I want to have you back on, because I feel like there's this whole, there's like 3 other things we can dive into.
Absolutely. Anytime. I'm happy to join you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And again, to our listeners, we will have links to your books, your podcast, your courses, your website, all of the incredible value that you offer everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Summer. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Our goal is to bring you all kinds of value that will help you navigate these challenging waters of blending a family.
Reach out to us if there's something specific you want to hear.
And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.
And if you really like it, share it with someone you love.
Ooh, and be bold enough to share it with someone you don't.